Hello, Vaughn. Legislature isn't sitting, but there's still lots going on. You're going to take a well-deserved break after at the end of this week, so we won't see you for a while. But maybe we could go out talking about pipelines.
Yes, so week started with a discouraging response from the provincial government to a pipeline proposal. The idea that there would be a new pipeline across northern British Columbia, bringing Alberta oil to the west coast to a shipment port in either Prince Rupert or Kitimat. And the provincial government didn't show much enthusiasm for that. They didn't completely rule it out, but they weren't very enthusiastic. But the end of the week, very good news, I would say, for the resource sector in BC. The Environmental Assessment Office provincially green-lighted continued construction of a natural gas pipeline in the Northwest, the Prince Rupert natural gas pipeline. And it would, if it goes ahead, it's already under construction. If it goes ahead, it would provide a flow of natural gas to a proposed LNG terminal that the Niska want to build within their traditional territory. So this is an Indigenous LNG project approved. There was a risk that the Environmental Protection Office or Assessment Office would send it back to square one. Instead, they said, nope, it can continue. So good pipeline news there. And I think the Premier's out of the country, but I think he'll be very happy with that news.
Okay. So what is the difference in the minds of the Premier as far as, bitumen from Alberta or natural gas from BC?
Well, you don't want to be too cynical about these things. There are environmental issues, but let's start with the fact that British Columbia doesn't have any oil and it has lots of natural gas. So if British Columbia is approving a natural gas pipeline, as it has, the natural gas is going to come from the BC Northeast. It will also include natural gas from Alberta and Saskatchewan, but the British Columbia government gets revenue from natural gas royalties. So that's the economic issue, and maybe that suggests a bargaining approach. If Alberta wants to build an oil pipeline through British Columbia, maybe they should say, and here's what's in it for you, BC. We're not just asking to use your geography and your coast, but we recognize you don't have much oil, so here's your benefit. Well, that would be an opening point for discussion. The thing with the environmental issue, however, is let's start with an oil pipeline that ruptures, makes a hell of a mess on the landscape. A natural gas pipeline that ruptures, it just vents into the air. The other thing is the British Columbia government has bought into the argument that natural gas is a transition fuel to take us out of the era of fossil fuels and into a cleaner era of power generation. So they'll say, natural gas is less messy environmentally than oil or coal. And so we're shipping natural gas, liquefied form, to Asian countries, and they will use that natural gas to replace coal-fired generation. So that's the argument. So the government has an argument that it's more environmentally sound, and that's why they support a gas pipeline, and they're kind of lukewarm on the idea of an oil pipeline. Although I would point out, they didn't completely rule out the oil pipeline either.
Is that right? And the federal Liberals still have a ban on
yes,
oil in the north as well.
That's right. To clear the hurdle for an oil pipeline through the north to Prince Rupert or Kitimat, the federal government would also have to lift its moratorium on oil tanker traffic through that era. Now, natural gas, LNG tankers, there's an LNG terminal in Kitimat that's almost ready to go. I toured it over a year ago. There is a fleet of tugs there owned by the local Indigenous nation that will escort the LNG tankers in and out of that inlet, and the LNG terminal will begin shipping. LNG Canada terminal will begin shipping this summer. they're already flaring the gas in Kitimat. So that's ready to go. And again, that is a project that would not have gone ahead if the John Horgan government, NDP government, hadn't offered the builders, Shell and its partners, a relief on provincial regulations and fiscal relief on going ahead. That project never would have gone ahead without them. So, you know, you give the NDP a hard time, and I have, and others have, over their lack of enthusiasm for oil pipelines. But we're getting LNG development in this province. Christy Clark promised it. The NDP have actually delivered it.
Well, and Adrian Dix is actually enthusiastic about the TMX pipeline now. And
yeah,
as you wrote this week. Yes.
I love the ironies in politics. So it's Adrian Dix, you know, in the 2013 election when he was NDP leader, in the middle of the campaign, he came out against the TMX project. The NDP at that point had been sitting on the fence on it, and he came out, no, it's not going ahead, right? And it helped cost him the election. I think the flip-flop more than just the pipeline issue. So they get up in the legislature this spring. Gavin Dew, who's an MLA for Kelowna, gets up and says, well, what about this proposal, Mr. Dix, that the federal government has under discussion, which is that we start dredging Burrard Inlet to allow the tankers that load oil in Burnaby from the terminal, the oil that comes in by the expanded TMX pipeline, they can't load fully because they hit the bottom in Burrard Inlet unless the tide is very, very high. And Dix gets asked, so what do you think about this dredging idea? And Dix said, well, we actually think it's a pretty good idea. He said, look, we built the pipeline, we paid for it, and he means all Canadian taxpayers by that. So we might as well make maximum use of the pipeline. And so he supports the idea of dredging the inlets so that each tanker, there's a growing number of them, each tanker can load fully. So, you know, if you're going to have tankers, you might as well get as most oil into them that you can. The pipeline, the TMX pipeline, is already pretty busy. In the most recent month, Harold, for which we have numbers, 90% capacity already in that pipeline. They loaded 29 tankers out of that terminal in the month of March. So that's almost one every day.
Wow. Interesting. Now, while all this talk is going on, the premier is off at his trade mission in Asia. Important, again, we've been talking a lot about market diversification in light of Donald Trump. He did miss the summit with Mark Carney, but what are the implications of that? What is he coming up with in Asia?
Well, I think Asia is touching base with a lot of customers and making it clear the government approach to expanding resource export, diversifying trade, standing up to the U.S. tariffs. I think there'll be a lot of sympathy on the other side of the Pacific for that, because everybody in the world is dealing with that. These trade missions, premier trade missions, going to visit customers and maybe future customers, takes a long time to set them up. EB couldn't go when the legislature was sitting because the NDP needs every vote in the House all the time. So they just set it up afterward. And canceling at the last minute because of Carney's meeting, I don't think that would have made much sense. I think it would have, you spend a lot of time apologizing to your customers. So the premier sent the deputy premier, Nikki Sharma, there. She's got a pretty good handle on the issues. I think she, delivered British Columbia's messages there. She also, because she's also Attorney General, she got to raise the lingering concern that BC has, which is that last year's federal government reform of bail provisions in the criminal code didn't go far enough, and there needs to be more changes. So I think all that went okay. I'm sure EB would have loved to have been there to see the Prime Minister. He did talk to him on the phone. He did pass on the messages. And as I said, British Columbia provided the only really discouraging word in that conference in Saskatoon on Monday, which is saying, we're not all that enthusiastic about shipping bitumen to the province. But BC said there isn't a proposal. So if there is a proposal, if Alberta gets one together and the oil and gas sector gets one together and the federal government is supportive and they're going to lift the moratorium, there's a lot of ifs in that, then I think British Columbia would take a serious look at it. The province is not as negative on the idea as it was way back when TMX had yet to be built.
Okay. The other thing that's online and getting a lot of attention from our readers is the public sector salary database that our colleague Nathan Griffiths spent many months putting together, and Laurie Culbert has been working with him to come up with some stories as well. Do you look at it? What do you think of that project?
Well, yeah, I think, the database raises a couple of issues, and I think it explains the public interest. And I think the first one is you look at that and you go, some of these people aren't paid enough. I was thinking of nurses in the ER or doctors, or one of my favorites, BC Hydro linemen, and they are mostly men still. So these are the guys that go out in the middle of the night in a howling gale and torrential rains to reconnect the power. And you can't pay those people enough. So there's those. And then there are others, and you go, like, why are we paying some of these bureaucrats this much money when it's not clear they're doing anything all that different than other bureaucrats? I hear complaints from people in the public service, in the provincial government, who can't get over how much, as they see it, equivalent bureaucrats at the health regions, municipalities, and regional governments get, because they get more money. And yet, why? I mean, is really a major position in the health ministry in Victoria or the education minister, should that person really be paid less than a school superintendent or the general manager of Metro Vancouver Regional District? So it's not personal. It's just that when you look at it, it appears scattershot. It's hard to figure out the fairness and equity question. And you come down to a suspicion that the provincial government gets more scrutiny because of the opposition and because of the fiscal discipline that's imposed by the Treasury branch in the finance ministry. And I realize that at the moment, fiscal discipline is not a concept that pops to mind immediately, but local government gets almost no scrutiny at all. And you get a sense that, the reason that it turns out that there are mayors in Metro Vancouver who make more money than the Premier of British Columbia, and I think one case makes more money than the Prime Minister, is just because nobody's been riding herd on Metro Vancouver at all. And so it's been, party time with the salaries. So I think, at the end of the day, I think the worthy exercise would be for local government and regional government and school boards to start exercising some discipline on the pay scale and try to bring some of those in line with the provincial government pay scale. Other issue I think is important is we're into bargaining in the public sector this year. So we've got almost 200 contracts up for renewal, and public servants are looking for a raise. One of the unions, the BC government, the BC General Employees Union, which represents central government, they say, look, people go, well, you're public servants, you're asking for too much money. And they say, there's a fairness issue in central government. And they say that it's true that the public service has increased dramatically under the NDP, but the increase has not been even. Frontline employees have not grown as the people who actually provide our services. They haven't grown at the rate of the political appointees in the government, the political staffers in the government, and the administrators. They say that's increased a lot faster than frontline, and they say that's an imbalance. They say if you're going to hire more public servants, and they of course argue that they should be people on the service delivery side, not on the political side or the administrative side. And I think that is a fair comment as well. And when you go through it line by line, I think some of that is borne out when you look at some of the salaries and you go, why is that person paid that much?
Yes, well, Laurie is looking at that tomorrow. I think she is determined that the number of folks earning 75,000 or more in healthcare education, the K-12, the core government, has leapt up, as you say, from 49,000 to 104,000 over the time of the NDP. And, where are those jobs? If we're as some people are asking in the story, if we've doubled the number of people in education and healthcare, why do we still have problems in our classrooms and in our hospitals?
Yeah. Well, a good example came out starting last week and continued this week is the pediatric ward. The pediatric ward in the Kelowna General Hospital, it's a big city in British Columbia, is closed for 6 weeks. It closed May 26 for 6 weeks because of a shortage of staff, of pediatric doctors. How does this happen? This is one of the biggest closures we've seen in the healthcare system. Kelowna, as I say, is not a rural hospital where the ER closes once in a while. And the government says, well, we're recruiting doctors all over the world. How does it happen that big a closure occurs? And all we've heard from the health minister, Josie Osborne, is, well, if you're a parent in Kelowna, you should still take your child to the ER, even though the pediatric ward is closed. I don't think a lot of parents will find that a very satisfactory response. And just because you take your child to the ER in Kelowna doesn't mean they're going to be treated there. They may put you on an air ambulance and airlift you to Vancouver Children's Hospital there because the Kelowna hospital can't handle what it's supposed to handle. The 10-bed pediatric unit is closed for 6 weeks at least until early July, and they say maybe longer than that.
Wow. Well, on that note, I wish you a happy summer, Vaughn, and we'll touch base soon when you come back. Thank you.
Yep. Very good. Thanks, Harold.